Hi, this is Kevin of the Virtual Planetarium at Raritan Valley Community College. Welcome to our weekly Star Talk. Today we're going to be talking about stars and constellations we can see year-round in the same part of the sky, kind of. But first, let's talk about our upcoming moon phases. We have a last quarter moon on February 23rd, we have a new moon on March 2nd, and then we have a first quarter moon on March 10th. Alright, like I said, today we're going to be talking about stars we can see in the sky year-round. And these are called circumpolar stars. These are stars that never rise and never set, and that's simply because they never fall below the horizon. And they're called circumpolar because they appear to move in a circle around the North Pole. The part circum means circle, and the part polar stands for pole. Here we have the sky set up for about 6:30 on the 23rd, so the middle of this week roundabout, and we are currently looking towards the north, because to see the North Pole we have to look towards the north. So that's why we have the N in front of us right here, and then we have the North Celestial Pole marked right here with a little blue cross, and then we have this circle going around it right here. And any star that falls within this circle right here is a circumpolar star. Because again, as the day goes on, as the night goes on, and the hours go on, the sky is going to be turning, but everything in that circle is just going to be moving within that circle, so it's never going to set below the horizon. Now, the most famous of circumpolar stars is the Big Dipper, which we have over here on the far right. Now, it's probably the most famous circumpolar group of stars, but it's actually just barely a circumpolar asterism. Because as you can see, it lies very, very close to the edge of the circle. So even though, let's give you an example, let's fast forward time, even though it's always up in the sky and it never sets, there does come a point where it's very close to the horizon, low to the horizon here, so it might be obscured by trees or buildings or something like that. So at some points of the year, even though the Big Dipper is a circumpolar group of stars, you still might not be able to see it because of the buildings and trees if you don't have a clear view of the horizon. Now notice that I haven't called it a circumpolar constellation, and that's because, as we've mentioned before, the Big Dipper is not actually an official constellation. The Big Dipper is just this group of 7 stars right here, so we have the top part of the Big Dipper here, and then the handle right down here. But it is part of a much bigger constellation of Ursa Major. So the whole constellation is this big bear right here in the sky, and we see that the Big Dipper is just the butt and the tail of the big bear in the sky. Now, the whole constellation isn't quite circumpolar because part of it does set below the horizon, but most of it is. But still, the Big Dipper is like the easiest part to find, so that's why we really talk about the Big Dipper instead of talking about Ursa Major. Now, the cool thing about the Big Dipper is that we can actually use it to find the North Pole, or to find the North Star, and by then, finding the North Pole. The way to do that is we actually take these last 2 stars here in the Dipper part of it, and we draw a line towards the top of the Dipper. So if this were a pot, you would fill up the water, and the water would be down here at the base. So if we draw a line straight through here, we come to this unimpressively bright star right over here. And that right there is Polaris, also known as the North Star. It's called the North Star because, as you can see, it lies very close to the North Celestial Pole. And that means that as time goes on, every star in the sky seems to move, except the North Star right there. And again, that's because it's very close to the North Celestial Pole, so as the Earth is turning, everything in the sky seems to move from east to west, but that star, since it's so close to the pole, it doesn't really seem to move that much. Now let's go back to a more reasonable hour. And as you saw when I clicked on the North Star, the Little Dipper came up. And just like the Big Dipper was part of the Big Bear in the sky, the Little Dipper is also part of the Little Bear in the sky. So we have Ursa Major and Ursa Minor right next to each other in the sky. So that's pretty cute. Now, another easy circumpolar constellation to find is actually opposite of the Big Dipper in the sky. So if we start at the Big Dipper and we go straight across and cross the North Pole, we come to this little sideways W group of stars right here. And this is the constellation of Cassiopeia. Now, Cassiopeia we talked about before because it is a part of the Greek mythology story of Perseus. I'm going to put a link for that story, the video we did on that story, in the description of this video, so you can check that out as well. Cassiopeia is the queen in that story, and she is the mother of Andromeda, who Perseus rescues after she is offered as a sacrifice. So in the sky, we can see the constellation of Cassiopeia, and while this W really doesn't look like a person, I think it's meant more to look like a throne, and with your imagination, you can kind of see that it is a throne. Now, Cassiopeia is a better circumpolar constellation because it doesn't get quite as close to the horizon as the Big Dipper does. So as we cycle through the hours, we can see that it goes below the North Pole, but it never sets below the horizon. And it doesn't really get that close to trees. It might still be covered slightly by some trees, but you still might be able to see most of it during every part of the year. So that's a cool thing about Cassiopeia. Now, like I said, Cassiopeia is the queen of the kingdom that takes part in the Greek story of Perseus, but her husband, King Cepheus, is also in the sky, and he's actually right here to her left. Cepheus, it's a little harder to find this constellation because the stars just aren't that bright, but it looks kind of like an upside-down house, so that's how it's easy to recognize. But again, the stars really aren't that bright, so it's a little harder to find. And then besides these four constellations and groups of stars that we also have two more constellations that are completely circumpolar for us here. The first one is Draco, which is pretty hard to find, so I'm not even going to describe it. But the cool thing about Draco is that it cycles from in between the Dippers and then around back over here. I think the easiest part to find about Draco is the head right over here, but even that's really hard to find, so I'm not even going to go into that. And then over here we have another circumpolar constellation of the Giraffe. So these 6 groups of stars right here, these 6 constellations and one very famous asterism, are circumpolar for us here in this latitude. Circumpolar stars are specific to your latitude because the further north you go, the different stars you're going to get that set below the horizon and don't. The further north you go specifically, the more circumpolar stars you're going to see, and that's because the North Star is actually going to be higher up in the sky, and so more and more things are going to stay above the horizon at all times. Conversely, the further south you go, the lower in the sky the Polaris is, and so the smaller that circumpolar circle is. So if you're at the North Pole, all the stars and constellations that you see are circumpolar, but if you go to the equator, none of them are, including Polaris, because it's not directly on that pole, so it does set a little bit below the horizon. So that's a fun fact. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hope you learned something new. You should at least try to go outside and find the Big Dipper. Now is a good time of the year to see it because it is just rising from above that horizon obstruction. If you have trees or buildings towards the northern horizon and you can't usually see it when it's low in the sky, now it's starting to rise at a more reasonable hour. So if you look towards the north, you can find that famous group of 7 stars and use that to find the North Star and maybe see the Little Dipper, but that one's a little harder to find. Once again, thanks for joining us. If you like this video, please give us a like, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our channel, and hope you have a great week.